Hey, horror fans, happy October once again. Board now back with Rachel McDonald, and we are pretty much at the end game of the Halloween franchise. We're, well, up to date at least, because Halloween Kills is out next week. So we've got one more film to review before we get there, and that is, of course, 2018 Halloween. Yeah, I've actually got the.
Yes, matching sets today. Good stuff.
So we've lined up this week. So I'm in the game. Halloween 2018. So David Gordon Green is the director, and this I certainly remember from the time was a much anticipated Halloween, partly because John Carpenter was back having at least some sort of involvement. He returned and did the music. He also had a producer credit, so I think loosely had some input on the script, not too heavily, but he at least had some ideas that went into it, I think. So first Halloween in a long time that Carpenter had a hand in, so I think that's what got people excited. Jamie Lee Curtis also returned. It was exciting seeing Jamie Lee Curtis back in a full role, let's say, in a Halloween movie. So it's kind of, I mean, I guess it's a sequel, but also sort of a reboot in some ways, because they do, again, slightly different timeline, and they are kind of restarting. And the plan is now that we're going to have 3 movies overall from this team, from David Gordon Green and his team. And so it's quite a similar plot to H2O. In the asylum, you have a pair of podcasters, so putting a modern twist on that. And they kind of get involved early on because they want to do a story on Michael Myers and the whole thing from years ago. They have his mask, which kind of stirs up some reaction eventually from Michael, and obviously they stir up things with Laurie from her past, and we see the impact it's having on her family, again quite similar to H2O. This time we have her daughter, played by Judy Greer, her husband, played by Toby Hoss, and also, I think you've already given away what you think of his character, because you pulled the face.
I didn't mean to, but yes, we'll get into that.
You need a better poker face. But yes. And also her granddaughter, who has quite a big role, and we see that Laurie is still haunted all these years later by what happened back in the day, back in the 70s. And obviously Michael comes after her once again and her family. And one of the big things they were going for in this version of Halloween is to have a more sort of feminist twist on it. In the publicity for the movie, Jamie Lee Curtis, I think, said then what attracted her and got her back was this idea then these years later, then in the original movie, in a way you had a man, a maniac, but a man sort of pursuing a woman and sort of like taking control of her narrative. So the appeal was then, in this, the twist is then the females, the main female characters, take back the narrative. They sort of fight back. I mean, obviously she did in the first one, but maybe not to the same extent as we see in this one. So all these years later, we see how obsessed Laurie is, how traumatized she is, but also just how prepared she is as well. How she's almost anticipating that one day Michael will get out. What did you think of it?
Since we started this rewatch after the original, I have been looking forward to watching this film. This is one of my favorite, if not my favorite sequel. And it's taken all of my self-control to not watch this ahead of time, but I wanted to wait and do it in the full rewatch. I put the Blu-ray into my player last night and the title screen came on and I immediately just started smiling because I just really appreciate this movie so much. So I remember, like you said, this was a very anticipated movie when they first released the press statement saying that it was going to go ahead. They said that Jamie Lee Curtis was coming back. They said that John Carpenter was coming back. And because we have had so many lackluster sequels for a movie that was so fantastic to begin with, it was so exciting to have a movie that was maybe going to finally raise the bar a little bit. I mean, we haven't had a decent sequel since H2O. It's maybe the only really decent sequel we have out of all the sequels we've reviewed. I mean, all you have to do is listen to our past reviews to kind of see how up and down the quality of the movies go. So I love this film. I love a lot of stuff about it. First of all, I made a note that I love that Michael has been locked up this whole time. I love that they changed the canon so that, well, not really change the canon. They do. It's like you said, it's kind of a sequel / soft reboot. So this one disregards every single sequel that has been made and is a direct follow-on from the first movie. So I like that they say that Michael was apprehended on that night, that he's been in the mental institution, because it solves that issue that we've had of previous films of where has he been this whole time? We've talked about it in H2O, we talked about it in Resurrection, we talked about it in Halloween 6. It's like, what has he been doing for all this time? Has he just been out there not killing people? Because that doesn't sound like Michael Myers. So I like that the fact that he's been in the institution for 40 years, it gives us that explanation of why he's been dormant, because he's been locked away. And I think that right off the bat is a great setup, because it gets rid of that stupid little plot inconsistency or plot hole, whatever you want to call it, of what has Michael been doing for X amount of years. Well, he's been sitting in a mental asylum. They reinstitute his silence. They talk about how he hasn't spoken a single word in 40 years, which is very fitting for the character. And of course, we start, like you said, with the podcasters, which the podcasters, I understand why they decided to go through that angle. They're a good way to get exposition in. They're a good way to get in some background without it feeling like it's an exposition dump. But I also do think that they may end up dating the film, if you know what I mean, like in 10, 15 years time, if podcasts aren't a thing anymore, that kind of the same way the reality TV show dated Resurrection. I wonder if maybe the podcast will date this movie. Do you think it will, or do you think podcasts will still kind of be around in 15, 20 years time?
It's hard to say. I mean, because obviously things do move forward at such a rapid pace. So it could well be another craze in the future, but certainly for now, it seems like it's here to stay, partly because I guess there's so many little niches that these podcasts can explore. But obviously at the moment, true crime podcasts are having their sort of moment in the sun. Yeah. I mean, there's some really big ones. So who knows? It's difficult to say if that'll still be a trend in like 5-6 years time.
Yeah.
Things move so fast, so maybe it won't be. So it could be just if you're of like a new generation, like if you're going to see like if you watch this movie as a 19-year-old in a few years time, I could see them maybe being a bit bemused if things have moved on. So
yeah, fair enough. So I just there was just a little thought I had, was like maybe it might date the movie, but I guess we'll see. I have to say the podcasters themselves kind of dicks. We'll get into that a bit, but what did you think of? I want to know your thoughts on before I give my thoughts. What do you think of the opening scene in the mental institution with the podcasters trying to provoke the reaction from Michael with the mask? Do you like it, or do you find it? Because I know that some people find it over the top, so I'm interested to see what you think.
I was into it until that point, until literally the bit before it cuts to the titles. Because I remember seeing that in the trailer, like the shot of like the checkered floor, which is a really good visual. It was amping up, and you got these different visuals. I was liking what I was doing, and I was at Castleback, and he's now an old man, basically, a much older man. So it's like a balding sort of version of Michael we see. But yeah, it sort of lost me by the end of the scene, because first of all, just how over the top and cartoony some of the other mental patients were. I know what they were going for. They were reacting, but Michael wasn't. That's part of the point of the scene, because they hold out this mask, the mask from years ago, and it provokes no reaction. Now, of course, that is paid off later in the film, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I did think it was OTT by the end of it, and yeah, so it sort of lost it for me at the end of the scene before.
Yeah, I get that. I'm kind of similar in that I feel that I think it's a good build up. I think it's a good introduction. I do not love the Doctor Loomis 2.0, and we will talk more about why I don't love him later in the film, because he is actually one of the only things I have to complain about this film, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I'm kind of the same. Like I think the build up is good, and I think that them going to see Michael is very interesting. Like you said, the checkered floor is a great visual. It's an interesting concept of these people going to try and provoke a reaction from him, and we're not even going to get into the depiction of mental illness that we see on the screen here. That's a whole other basket for a whole other time.
Yeah, and that's disappointing considering it's a modern film, because they don't really have that excuse of it's, that's the culture it was in.
Exactly.
We have moved on. So
yeah, it's a bit disappointing. But that all being said, I think there is one thing that this scene does do that I think is important for the film and for reestablishing Michael's character, is it really emphasizes the stillness and the hardness of Michael and the coldness. So I like the juxtaposition of like this mask is provoking, because obviously we teeter back into the whole, is he human? Is he supernatural? Like what's going on? That kind of weird thing that they play with in the first movie, which surrounds Laurie a bit too, this movie. Again, we'll get into that. But so the mask is obviously provoking all these reactions from all these other people. And I like that amidst all the craziness, Michael is just still and just there. And he's still just that still, silent, kind of, and we'll find out eventually, unstoppable force. So I think that even though that opening scene is definitely over the top, and I understand how by the end of a scene it could definitely take you out of the experience and kind of lose you a bit, I do think it does a fantastic job of emphasizing that hardness and that stillness to Michael. And I think that's been missing in previous films, so I like that they brought it back. And I like that, like you mentioned, it's Nick Castle, and he was obviously an old man now, but like even as an old man, I still find like the shots and the establishing shots very creepy. And I'm still like, he might be old, but he's still Michael. And I like that they show the hint of his eye where Laurie got him with the coat hanger, and you can see that he still has the scars from the fight. So I do think it's a great establishing shot, but I do agree that it is quite over the top. So I understand how it can take some people out of the experience, or just a little too OTT. And like we said, there's really no excuse for having that sort of portrayal of mental illness in this day and age. Like that's stuff that should have been left in the 80s and the early 90s. We need to be better than that these days, I think. So definitely not the strongest opening scene, but also not the worst that we've had in the franchise. So kind of, I think, in middling ground, this opening scene.
I think, the idea of it was good, and obviously what it sets up, it's just the execution I sort of have with the film in a way, and probably as a warning. Now, I hadn't seen this since the cinema, and I think that's partly why I feel a bit differently this time around, because I think going to see it at the cinema, like seeing a modern Halloween film at the cinema, was a great thrill. And I think we were getting that buzz again, that Halloween buzz, which probably we won't like recapture this time for Halloween Kills, because we've sort of had like a first movie, and so it's hard to like have that sort of anticipation again. But just the fact Carpenter was back involved, they seem to be going back to some of the basics, which obviously the original movie had, and it was all very exciting. So I think to actually go to the cinema and see a Halloween movie, because really the only one I'd seen on the big screen before that was the remake, the zombie remake.
Oh, okay.
Because I know, obviously, I wasn't around in '78, and obviously some of the sequels for whatever reason, I didn't see them at the cinema. Impact on me, I was determined to like have a good time with it, and I still have a good time with it in places. Now, I want to talk about the director at this point, David Gordon Green, because I think his style, his direction style, is part of the problem, and I think it's worth talking about his career because he's had a weird sort of career because he started off making sort of like very small, low budget, like edgy sort of indie movies, but quite quirky. I guess they're quite quirky in a way, but like he did a film called All the Real Girls with like Zoe Deschanel in, and
Okay.
kind of sort of done like, that's how he started though, like more sort of independent, sort of sort of gritty style dramas in a way, and then he moved on to like more like bromance style comedies, like more mainstream films, like he did Pineapple Express, for example.
Yes.
So it's a weird sort of career like transition, and I think that may be part of the problem here because obviously he hadn't really directed a horror before. So I think the problem here is that maybe there is an inconsistent tone where it's almost like the two sides of him appear in this movie in some ways, because obviously there are some scenes where he's going for, I guess in a way, like a nod to the original, where it is this more grounded sort of drama and a bit more obviously like low budget and edgy. And then there are other scenes where he's definitely going for pushing hard with the humour, early with the father, who like you, I'm going to assume you weren't the biggest fan.
And I think I know exactly which scene you're about to talk about as well.
Well, the peanut butter.
The peanut butter. Yeah. What is that line? I yelled that out when I was watching it. Stephen was in the other room and I was like, what? Who sat down and wrote that line? For those not in the know, the father, who is kind of an idiot, is setting mouse traps and one of them snaps and he literally says, with his wife and daughter in the room, oh, I got peanut butter on my penis. It's like, who wrote that line? No, I have to admit that line almost makes me want to, like, at the end of it, take a point off scoring at the end because it's just that bad. I 100% agree.
Yeah, and it's very cringe, and you don't buy it coming from this guy who's like middle age, and he's like the far, and obviously he's doing it in front of his teenage daughter, but. This is, I mean, and this isn't like necessarily a prime example, but I mean, of like the problems with some of the bigger scenes. But this feels like a Pineapple Express line. And I mean, obviously, if you find those movies funny, you find them funny. That's the taste. But they are obviously meant to be comedies anyway. But in this, it's just a line that's thrown in, and they're just at the dinner table, and you've got a father who stands out like a sore thumb, and it's a really bad line.
I 100% agree. That line is terrible, and because I've watched this movie a few times since I first saw it in the cinema, and I was like you, I've never seen a Halloween film in the cinema. I have only ever seen like the first one, and the sequels I have watched on DVD. So I was like you, I was like, I want to go and enjoy the experience of seeing a Halloween film in the cinema, and it was fantastic. But I have watched it several times since because I just enjoy it so much, and every time I watch it, I just know that line is coming up. If I could just take one thing out of this movie, it would be that freaking line, because it is so out of place. And like you said, it's not even like maybe if they'd given it to a different character, or maybe if they put it in a different scene in the movie, because it just feels weird and out of place, and it doesn't help that the dad is not a particularly likable character in general. Like, as the rest of the movie goes on, you don't end up liking him anymore, so it's not like you can rewatch the movie after you've seen the whole thing and think, oh well, he gets better, because he really doesn't. So, and then even after that line's the worst, but even after that, he then has this weird thing where he's talking to his daughter about like her boyfriend, and he's all like, oh yeah, he's a nice guy now, but then he gets you pregnant, and then you're working at the gas station, and he's drinking your beer, and you're getting fat, and it's like, what are you even talking about, dude? Like, shut up. But I definitely like 100% agree with where you're coming from and what you're saying. I think I even have it like noted down on my notes here, like what the hell was that line? Like who actually wrote that? So 100% I get where you're coming from. Luckily, I don't think there's too many of that instance in the movie. Like it's mostly just that one at the beginning, and there's a couple of instances later on with the friends who have a few
With the
lines that make me
friends,
go,
yeah.
ugh, these. I do agree. Yeah. Anyway, you go.
Because I mean, it's worth saying that definitely in most horror movies, even the most like straightforward series, that there is room for humor. I think it's good to sort
Yeah.
of and there's a good example of humor in the middle of this, which we'll get to, but with the babysitter
The
and
babysitter, yes.
boy, and we'll talk about that. But that's definitely an example where the humor works, and you've got obviously
Yeah.
likable characters in that case. So cringe lines, one or two
Oh,
at
definitely.
various
Yes.
times,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
positive on this movie than I was. I think the first time I enjoyed it with one or two reservations, I sort of enjoyed it as a back to basics Halloween style movie. It was quite a fun popcorn style movie, especially like seeing it on the big screen. And I like the ending, and I do like, the feminist twist, and kind of great to have Jamie Lee Curtis back, and she's totally badass. She's sort of gone all G.I. Jane and sort of Sarah
Sarah
Connor-esque
Connor.
yeah, Sarah
Hmm.
Connor, especially with the way she like dresses and stuff. But
Yeah.
good sequel first time around. I think it's dropped a bit this time around. I think the problems did stand out more. And I think part of it is because I don't think the horror scenes are that suspenseful or scary. I think we've got a good Michael. I think it's a return to, obviously it helps and they've got the actor back, but it's sort of a return to obviously the sort of Michael we had originally. But I think the horror scenes themselves aren't very good. I don't think they're very suspenseful. Busters when they get killed in the toilet, for example. There's something about the atmosphere in that scene because, like, he chooses to insert like a grunge style like sound effect, like this industrial type sort of drone, and
Okay.
it takes me out of the scene. It's not the sort of like effect, like sound effect you use for like a suspense or horror style scene. I think he's like a good director. I've seen a few of his like other films, but I'm not sure he has it as a horror director. And I do wonder if it's the two like styles. It's a bit mixed in the tone. Is what I'm trying to say. Because I think the other thing is, although I like most of the stuff we get with Laurie, her family, I like the granddaughter, I like the actress, and I like that character. And a lot of the Halloween style stuff and updating the film, updating like the story, that stuff I like, and I like the ending. But there's a lot of other fluff before we get to that. I mean, it jumps about a lot. The final scene, I think, is effective, like really effective in what it's doing. I think for a lot of the film, there's just been other stuff going on, which kind of you lose the sense of momentum. That scene landed, but it probably would have landed even more if we didn't have this other stuff going on. And going back to basics in many ways is a good thing, but again, I think without Carpenter directing, that stands out as just being a little bit of a rehash. So I'll give you an example. I think that the tracking shot with Michael going through the town and him going through, at one point he goes through a house and just like randomly kills an old woman. And again, I think that's just a kill just for the sake of a kill. It's just, but it's almost just doing that beat. This is Michael terrorizing the town. But without Carpenter directing, it's not as good. But I think what I'm saying is it just felt like a nostalgic beat for the sake of a nostalgic beat. In a way, we could have got to the stuff with him and Laurie a lot quicker, and just aren't that great for me. I think with the podcasters as well, I mean, let's just talk about them for a moment. The payoff, I like the scene with Michael getting his mask back, that moment. But I'm not sure they served that much of a purpose. Because, to be honest, until you said, well, they're in a way to, like, it's a way for exposition, which, okay, that's fair. I didn't think of that, to be honest. But, like, the way I read them is that it was more just a way to modernise the film, rather than them actually serving a lot of plot purpose. And I was indifferent to them as characters, you know. I thought, well, they're just okay. Drafting it, that they're like spending too much time cutting between characters, and it's almost like they sort of drain suspense out of the scene. And it's just shot in a really, like Cindy on the stream last night when we were watching it, said it's sort of shot in this weird way where even though she's kind of more the victim in the scene, it spends a lot of time on his face, as in like the other podcaster.
Got some counterpoints, because both scenes that you described, the gas station scene and the long tracking shot, I love both those scenes. So I think the podcasters, like I said, my impression is that they're there so that we have a link back into the story. First of all, we need a gateway to go back into the story to start to revisit Michael Myers. Even though I do think that they may end up making the film feel dated, I do think they are a very relevant way to bring Michael Myers into a modern setting. Like you said before, true crime podcasts are becoming huge. They're very big, and if Michael Myers were an actual killer in real life, he 100% would have dozens of these nut jobs lining up to try and get an interview with him. So I think their enthusiasm for the topic and the way they're trying to hunt down Michael and hunt down Laurie and get to the bottom of things, I think that is a very good way to kind of reintroduce the characters to, they're kind of the focal point of initially of like, here they're going to go see Michael, so we get the reintroduction to Michael. They're going to go see Laurie, so we get the reintroduction to Laurie. They link the two of them through their podcast, and then they get to be the first victims to show us that Michael Myers is back. And for me, and obviously I have talked about this in almost every single one of our videos, but I'm going to say it again, if there's a good Michael Myers in the film, that can do wonders for me. And this is the very first Michael Myers since the original that I have actually felt, yes, he's back. This is Michael Myers. And I think that the scene in the gas station starts to set that up brilliantly. Now, the director himself, I remember when I heard that he had done the Pineapple Express, I remember thinking, really? You're going to get that guy to do this movie? Yeah. It was a very strange choice. I was watching some behind the scenes after I watched the movie, and it seems that he just loves Halloween, that he is a big fan of the original movie. He's a big fan of Carpenter. They had a round table with him and Carpenter and Jamie and one of the producers from Blumhouse, and they were all talking about the movie. And I think that really comes across in it. And again, for me, that's such a big thing. Like we talked about this with the zombie films. I talked about how I didn't like to shit on Zombie because I was like, he is obviously a horror fan, and anyone who's a horror fan is like, you know, that's a plus in my book. So the fact that they loved this character so much and they loved this movie so much that they wanted to kind of bring it back and not improve upon it, because obviously the first movie is so good, but build on what they had already made. So I think the gas station scene, I love that scene because they do a lot of background work in that scene. So you have a lot of Michael moving around in the background, kind of the way he did in the original film. So the first shot you see is him just walking behind one of the podcasters as he's filling up the car. You just see him just walk casually behind him. Then you have that shot of him killing the attendant while the female podcaster is in the foreground, and then you see him in the background just whacking the guy. And again, it all happened in the background. Oh, this is completely random and off topic, but I did find it amusing when she went into the gas station and she was like, where's the loo? And he's like, the what? And she's like, oh, the bathroom. I'm like, both Keith and I would know exactly what that is because she's British and that is part of Australian slang as well. So I just thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, so you see him, in the background a lot. You see him moving around. I love that this movie, I think, does a really good job of mixing up both on-screen and off-screen kills. So we have some great on-screen kills, but we also have some great after effects of kills, like the guy at the gas station who has had his entire jaw has been ripped open. And again, for me, it just shows that Michael is back, that this unstoppable force of evil is back. Now, the sound effect you were talking about, I didn't notice. Next time I'll watch, I'll keep an ear out for it, but it apparently didn't bother me as much as it bothered you. I will say one thing for the bathroom kill. I do think that the kill of the male podcaster was starting to drift into zombie territory. It was getting a little too full on for me. But it's the only kill in the movie that I feel that way. But when he's like slamming his head against the bathroom, and then you see that he's not actually dead, and it's a bit horrifying. I think the reason they were cutting to him during the girl scene was to show, because this movie has a little bit more the emotional toll, like he's watching his partner. I mean, whether or not they're romantically involved, they're obviously friends. And he's having to watch her die. So I think it's supposed to emphasize that, yes, Michael's an unstoppable killing machine, but he's also leaving very real victims in his wake, and I think it's supposed to emphasize that. So while I think the actual kills were maybe a little bit over the top, I think that the overall gas station scene was done so well because there's so much background Michael in that scene that for me it works, of him being the shape again. He's there, he's lurking. And then of course I think the scene where he does put the mask on is fantastic. I think it's such a great shout out. I like that they have the theme playing, but it's a very slow, subtle version of the theme, so it's not all over the top. And then he just puts the mask on, and then they have that shot through the rear vision of the car, and it's just like, yes, he's back, and it's brilliant. So that leads me to the tracking shot, because I think that tracking shot is brilliant. I think it's a great shout out to the original film. And again, I think it's supposed to be establishing once more that this is Michael Myers that you just don't want to fuck with, man. Like, he is back, and he is an unstoppable force. He is the boogeyman. He is the shape. And I think that scene where he just walks through and starts killing people, because that's what he does, is brilliant.
Because it seems too similar to the sort of scene you had in the original. I think it's almost like you can play Prestige without, in a way, just doing the same scene. It's strongest when it's focusing on the Laurie stuff.
I do too, definitely. But I guess there's a fine line to walk between homage and copying, and I guess for some fans it works and some fans it doesn't. I don't know, for me it worked, and I always get a big smile on my face when I see that scene, because I think it's great. And I think obviously Castle wasn't under the mask the whole time. They did have a stunt double playing Michael as well, but whoever they had, I think he has that fluidity down again. He has that physical presence, and I really also like the shots of him walking around in, like, kind of hiding in plain sight. He's walking around while everyone else is also walking around. It's kind of like, you feel scared for these people because they don't realize the danger they're in, but it's also marveling at how brazen he is by walking around in plain sight. But like, the night itself is hiding him because it's Halloween. Oh, did you notice when he bumps into the kid right at the beginning of the tracking sequence, I think there's a couple of kids behind who are wearing Silver Shamrock masks.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, so next time, if you do, keep an eye out for that. A little shout out to Season of the Witch there. So, yeah, I thought that tracking shot, I thought it was great. I thought it reestablished Michael. I thought the horror elements for me, they work in this film. I don't find it as scary as like the first film, but I definitely find it more effective than a lot of the more recent films that we've had. And like I said, this Michael for me is fantastic. He's my favorite Michael since the original one, because I just find him that terrifying and that intimidating. But I definitely agree that the movie works better when it focuses on Laurie. So this might be a good time to switch to her characterization. Obviously, you mentioned a bit that you like this Laurie. Did you want to expand on like what you like about this version of Laurie so much?
Well, one thing I do like, and I'll mention Judy Greer here because she's a brilliant actress who sort of has, she plays Laurie's daughter. She sort of has this knack of blockbuster type movies, but they normally only give her small roles, and I sort of feel, well, I'm glad she was there. I think she made the film better, but yeah, the film would have been better with more Judy Greer, and she probably has a bit more of a role here, and obviously plays a big part in the end. But yeah, no, one scene I did like is the scene of her sort of selling the past and the effect it had on her as a kid. The stuff with Laurie and Michael, she mentions about social services having to come round and things like that. And we obviously with Alison, who that character I did like. We had some stuff with her and Laurie, some stuff, I guess, again similar to H2O, except this time it's her granddaughter, where Alison kind of sells how, you know, it's time for you to move on, grandmother. It's time for you to forget about Michael Myers. And so, I mean, not that we got that much of that stuff, but scenes like that, I think, did a good job of selling that side of the plot. And I definitely liked Laurie waiting at like the asylum when he was being like transferred together. Those three characters, three females, that's obviously, you know, kind of nailing the point that they were going for. And it's sort of, I guess, significant then that the husband does get killed off, Alison's father.
Good riddance.
Yeah, so on two levels, it obviously adds to the feminist point, and obviously he was a pretty shitty character.
Yeah.
Shame again, because I like that actor as well. He's in a lot of good, but the character itself wasn't my bag. But
no.
But we have that ending, which I thought was really effective, and you have a nice moment for Judy Greer when she like outsmarts Michael, and the idea is that it's a trick that she's learned from Laurie. So it almost become like the three of them like ganging up and taking back power and forcing him into the basement.
So three generations of Strode women coming together.
Stuff like that I like. I think if you're going to do a modern Halloween film and expand on things and put a modern twist, I think that's the stuff I like. The film when Laurie comes to visit Alison at school, there's like this shot of Alison in the classroom looking out at Laurie, and it's a very similar shot to in the original when Laurie was the student and in high school, and it was actually Michael waiting outside, or it was suggested it was Michael. So that's like a role reversal style shot, which I enjoyed as well.
I just want to touch on that for a second, because I really do love how this movie shows Laurie has actually started to take on some of Michael's like characteristics and properties. So you have that shot, obviously. There is a shot later on where she falls off a balcony and disappears, exactly the same as the end shot of the original film. And then there's a great shot where she appears out from behind Michael, out of the shadows, again, which is a reversal of the shot from the first movie where he appears out of the shadows behind her. So I like that the movie is suggesting that Laurie is not becoming a monster, but that in order to take down this force, this unstoppable strong force, she has to become just as strong as him. And a lot of the marketing for the film was marketed around the fact that Laurie and Michael have become like almost mirrors of each other, that they, you know, even the podcasters, you know, kind of worked that angle in at the beginning, you know, two monsters who have been caged due to what happened that night. And so I like that Laurie has taken on characteristics of Michael, and that she's almost herself become a little bit supernatural, a little bit elevated, a little bit something other than human. So I really did like that angle a lot. That I'm glad that you brought that up. It was a very cool part of her character, I thought.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that stuff works. So I think what it comes down for me, and I think probably by the sounds of it, our main disagreement is on the horror stuff. I don't think the horror stuff really works that well. And I agree with you, we've got a good Michael back. Another difference, maybe that's not enough for me. I think you still need suspenseful scenes. Kills I were a bit indifferent to. They weren't necessarily that great. I think that I can't remember which one it was, but there's one later on that I quite liked. It might have been with like the nerdy friend, the way he was like sort of killed off, but
the spike through the
him on the spike.
Yeah.
I that was a good kill actually, but for the most part, because another scene I wasn't too keen on, I didn't like the scene where Michael escaped on the road, and again you had all these over the top mental patients. Find that a very suspenseful scene, and a kid who you had with his father, who's like they were driving by at the time, and like the father went out to check, and I mean this sort of stuff that now the kid ends up being killed, but it's sort of this stuff where he tries to drive the car, and it's like, well, this is a nitpick, but I mean, how old is this kid? I mean, he looked about like 8 to me, and he's about to drive the car off. I mean, that's a bit weird, but
it's getting a bit desperate, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But
well, fair enough. I mean, it doesn't work for everyone. I don't think it's as suspenseful as the first film, definitely. There are scenes that work for me. The bus crash, maybe not. I do... This is going to sound weird and kind of creepy, but I do actually like that he kills the kid because, again, I think it emphasizes the complete monster that is Michael Myers. You know, we don't usually see him going after children, so the fact that he does kill this kid, and in quite a horrifying way, for me, it's like, again, just emphasizes that, yes, he's back. But I just wanted to go back to Laurie's characterization briefly because that is, for me, the standout of this movie is Laurie Strode and her characterization. So when they were doing H2O, Jamie Lee Curtis wanted Laurie to be more of a wreck than she is in that film. She wanted her to be like worse off, and the script writers decided that they wanted her to have more to lose, so they made her a bit more stable than what she wanted. And I remember reading that Jamie Lee Curtis was actually quite disappointed with the characterization that she ended up with in H2O. And when I first saw this film, I was so impressed with Laurie's characterization that I actually, the very next day, wrote a video essay on her characterization and Michael's characterization. It's on my channel, guys, if you want to find it. It's one of my earliest, like, actual video essay styles, called The Characterization We Deserve, because I just thought that I thought that they took the blueprint from H2O, because obviously her characterization is very much inspired by her characterization in H2O, and then they kind of improved upon it. I loved the Sarah Connor style preparation that she has. I thought that was fantastic. I loved that she'd become so extreme and so hard and so convinced that Michael was going to come back. I think that is kind of a continuation of like him being the boogeyman and being so traumatizing. And I thought that they really got her trauma down really well. When we spoke of H2O, I said that there was going to be a scene that I was going to talk about in this movie versus that movie that I think are almost mirror scenes. So in H2O, we have that nightmare that Laurie has at the beginning, and she wakes up screaming and flailing around on her bed because she's just imagined seeing the shape. I think that scene is mirrored in the scene where she's waiting for the bus outside the asylum, and she hallucinates Michael and she screams in the car, because I think if you look at the way the first one is shot, it's very goofy. You know, it zooms out quickly and she's flailing around and she has kind of a stupid look on her face, and then her son kind of runs in to wake her up. It almost comes across as like comedic, whereas in this one you very clearly see that it's just the trauma. You know, the scream is much more visceral, the horror on her face is much realer, and then she goes to her family, to the dinner that her family are having, and she just breaks down, and you see for like a second you see the scared little 17-year-old girl coming through, asking, was it the boogeyman? And I think that they really do her trauma so well. Like you, I think that Judy Greer is great. I think that Karen is a great character. I think that Allison is a great character. And I think the three generations of Strode women, like you said, coming together at the end to kind of take Michael down is fantastic. And I like that they show, yeah, like you were saying, the effects that Laurie's PTSD has had on her family, how she lost custody of her daughter, how her daughter obviously has trust issues, how they have communication issues. I like that she does seem to have some sort of relationship with her granddaughter. Like, I like that, she's not completely cut off. I thought it was really sweet that when she takes the money from the podcasters, she immediately turns around and gives it straight to her granddaughter and is like, go and do something fun with this, go and, don't just stick this in savings, go and do something fun and enjoy yourself. And her granddaughter obviously loves her a lot. I like that Allison seems to, genuinely want her to be a part of their lives. Even when she tells her off and says it's time to let go of Michael, it's coming from a place of, we love you and we want you to be part of our family, but you can't be part of our family while you are acting like this. So yeah, I thought Laurie's characterization was the absolute highlight of this movie, and that they did such a great job with her character. They actually gave her the same hairstyle as they in 1978 to kind of show how she's been stuck in that time. I thought that was a nice little touch. Yeah, they wanted to kind of show that she hasn't been able to grow past that period. So she has the exact same hairstyle 40 years later. So I thought Laurie's characterization was fantastic. And so that for me, again, that really elevates the film. The fact that Laurie is such a strong character really makes the film that much better for me, because they do her so much justice in this one. I think she's just so great. And I love the end scene, with them taking down Michael. I love that even though there's three of them, it still takes so much to take him down, and I love that subversion of, she has that thing under the under the floorboards, and my daughter's all like, oh my God, I'm in a cage. And then Karen's like, no, honey, it's not a cage, it's a trap. And then they have that little thing where they trap Michael down there. So it's a great reversal. It's a great end scene. This first, but let's talk about Loomis 2.0 and the horrible twist that surrounds his character. Why don't you start with Dr. Sartarian, I think his name is.
So, yeah, the link to the original is, and he's a student of Loomis, which is fine. I actually don't mind that. And the actor, I think, does a solid job. I think he's not bad. But yeah, we sort of get to this twist where he has a father and son type thing with Michael. He's like too obsessed, and the sort of twist is that he's actually trying to protect Michael. Because when I was watching it last night, I'd actually forgotten about this. So
lucky you.
I commented on, well, yeah, because when he kept saying, you can't shoot him, I was, well, why is he saying that? I mean, he knows how dangerous this guy is. But yeah, so that's sort of a twist when the cop from shooting Michael, which then I think leads to the cop being killed. And ultimately, he's just got this ego about him in the scene where he wants to keep Michael alive for experiments. And he has this ego where he thinks he can control him. And there's a weird sort of part of the scene where he's wearing the mask at one point and he scares Alison.
Yes, so
that didn't make any sense.
Well, the thing is, he mentions as they're in the car, and he mentions this a few times before, that he wants to know what Michael thinks when he kills, that he wants to get inside his mind, and he wants to know what sort of pleasure or excitement or whatever he gets from killing. So the doctor, actually kills the sheriff, which, by the way, I love the sheriff. The sheriff is awesome. He was a great character. He's listed as being in the next movie, so maybe he's not quite dead. I mean, this is a franchise where people can survive being shot through the eyes, so why not have the guy survive being stabbed multiple times? So I think that him putting the mask on after he murders the sheriff is supposed to be him being like, oh, this is what it's like to be Michael Myers. This is what it's like to be inside his head. But it didn't it didn't work for me on any level. I thought it was a really dumb way to kill off the sheriff. I thought it was a really stupid twist that came out of nowhere that we didn't really care about, because we don't really care about this character. He's kind of just a useless character. In fact, I reckon you could probably take him out of this film and it wouldn't make much of a difference, except for one plot point. And this is the part that really annoys me, because I actually think the rest of this script works really well. This whole movie, they've been talking about Michael versus Laurie, and Laurie's been talking about how I've been waiting for him, I'm prepared for him, I'm ready for him. And then they end up being brought together because of this doctor, because this doctor decides to drive Michael to Laurie's house, and then like that's how he ends up there. Like, this whole movie, we've seen how prepared Laurie is. Like, I just feel like her and Michael coming together at the end, it should have been her luring him to her, you know, laying a trap, or him seeking her out. It shouldn't have been some random new character just bringing them together through coincidence. Like, for me, that really brought the story down a bit, because I was like, you've set up this whole thing of Michael and Laurie, you know, being these mirrors for each other, waiting for each other, and then they're brought together by some random doctor that like neither of them really have anything to. Yeah, it just, I know, it didn't work for me, and it takes me out of the plot a little bit.
Noxious as a character, and he obviously put Alison in danger, and it definitely came out of nowhere. You obviously sensed something was going to happen just because of the way he kept saying stuff like, we can't shoot him, sort of thing. And and obviously that's not something you would have seen from Loomis, because Loomis would be, okay, ideally maybe capture him, take him back to, but Loomis was very much, I know what this is. I mean, if it's me or him, and if it's stopping him from going on a killing spree, then I will kill him, sort of thing. That was never a doubt, really. But,
no.
So I kind of hated that. I think a lot of people do. A lot of people have commented on that. Another example for me of padding in the movie, where the movie does lose momentum. So I think the problems are a combination of, I don't think it's particularly well directed. I don't think the horror scenes are that suspenseful. Because it's a movie where I like a lot of the ideas. And I mean, some people have said they don't even like the end scene because of the execution rather than because it's not, in theory, a good scene. But I disagree with that. I like the execution of the end scene. But for me, it's a combination of, I think, outside of the Laurie stuff. Like, if you took the Laurie stuff out of the movie, I'm not sure how strong it would be. And the horror stuff not really being that great for me. I mean, there's stuff, I mean, Alison and her friends, I don't think her friends are that great. Apart from the babysitter, we can talk about. I mean, I like the stuff with her and Julian. Maybe a shame they didn't have a bit more time, but they had a charming link, and again, that's probably another nod to the original movie because of her being a babysitter, and I think that's an example where actually the comic relief did work. Because you have this really charming kid, and there's a nice bond, and he just has some funny lines when he's like giving shit to Dave, and he comes rushing out. The boogeyman's in the closet, and shut up, Dave. And Dave was quite douchey, so I with him on that. And he has the old shit moment where, which some people have not, but I think because it's a kid, then it works. So it's like a reaction a kid might have.
Yeah,
I know how it feels like a comedy line, but it also feels like a line that a kid might sort of not thinking sort of have.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I also love when. Sorry, I was going to say with Julian. You're saying with Dave, when he's like, someone's upstairs, and Vicky's all like, oh, I'll go check it out. He's like, no, send Dave, just send Dave. And I'm just like, yeah, kid, yeah. But no, Julian and Vicky, very cute. And I like the subversion of that, you know, because obviously in the original movie, Linda and some of the other babysitters were supposed to be kind of like dicks, and that was kind of their, you know, juxtaposed to Laurie, who was nice. So I liked that Vicky was not a dick. You know, she genuinely cared about Julian. She was sweet to him. She joked around with him. When he was scared, she went up and she checked on him. As she's dying, she's screaming, run, Julian, run. You know, she's still thinking of the kid. And so I found her death very sad because I thought she was a great character.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I don't know if you found this too on the nose, but I liked the sheet callback. I liked that Michael covered her with the sheet, and it was a little callback to the sheet from the original movie. I thought that was a fun shout out. So yeah, everything about Vicky's death and her character was really good, because we have some douchey boyfriends in this one again. That seems to be a staple of the Halloween franchise.
I think could have been lost from the film, or it's just the cliche of her having a douchey, what turned out to be a douchey boyfriend. And I mean, then even later on, was quite sympathetic, but then he tried hitting on her, and he has this really like ridiculous excuse. And he really annoyed me in that scene where he just kept rambling on about, oh, I was surrounded by all these hot girls at the party and they were dancing.
And I know, and that feels a little bit like what you were talking before, like a little bit of the Pineapple Express humor kind of coming in that kind of doesn't quite work, like not in that scene. Again, it's kind of like the peanut butter line, you know, it takes you out of the experience. It's like this kind of humor doesn't really belong in this kind of movie. Like, I'm not saying that humor doesn't have a time and a place, but that time and place is the Pineapple Express. It's not Halloween. So, but his death was pretty good. We should briefly talk about the death scenes, because you mentioned not being too impressed with a lot of the kills.
No, his death I quite like, and probably because he was doing my head in at the time, it probably was quite enjoyable. I think the placement in the film, though, was a bit odd, because it feels like something they would do quite early on. I guess it was just because it was like building to the climax at the house, and obviously Alison was like walking home at the time. But yeah, I mean, stuff like that, like this nerdy teenage character who's like quite obnoxious and is like prime for a kill. I think it feels like something you would do earlier in the film. It felt strange than that sort of character was like still knocking about at this stage in the film, because it didn't feel like a character you had that much invested in. I like the actual kill. I wasn't so keen on the stuff with her walking away, and it took her forever to realise he was actually dead. Well, sorry, I mean, it's before he was actually dead, but he was screaming because of what Michael was doing. I thought that was a little bit clunky. Did it out a bit too long.
Oh, fair enough. I did like the subversion of her running down the street and screaming for help and actually receiving help. You know, people actually came out and were sitting with her on the front porch, as opposed to, again, the scene from the first movie where Laurie is running around screaming for help and no one comes to their doors. So again, there's quite a few subversions that I like, but that guy's kill, I thought that was good. I thought some of the kills in this movie were actually quite good. I have to admit, the Doctor, one thing I did like about him is his kill scene was brilliant and horrifying. Gets his head stomped in by Michael in one thing, which kind of is similar to like the zombie film, but like not as gratuitous. It's just one good stomp and like that's it, he's done. And I thought, I remember at the cinema when that actually happened, I'm pretty sure like the entire cinema just gasped, because we were all just like, holy crap, did that just happen? And I think, like I said, well, I know not effective for you, but I think some of the kills in the tracking shot worked really well for me. I liked the off-screen hammer kill. I really liked the kill where he just comes up behind the lady in the house and stabs her through the throat, and like that's it. Like it's like so click and clean and efficient. And again, it just kind of emphasizes that unstoppable force of Michael Myers. So and again, that just really worked for me. So I think some of the kills were really good. I think I was a little bit I felt the tension a bit more than you seem to. There were some scenes for me that were quite tense. I found the tracking scene was really good. I actually thought the lead up to the nerdy guy's death was a little creepy, with him talking to Michael thinking that he was the owner of the house, and Michael keeps getting closer and closer to him and is just not saying anything, and he's kind of lit up by the floodlights, and I found that quite creepy. Like I said, not as creepy as the first film, but creepier than almost every other film we have watched. Like almost all the other sequels have like a complete lack of tension. I thought this one at least had a little bit more. Not all of them, but a lot of them were like, I did not find scary. So,
I mean, I suppose it's a sign we've obviously disagreed on some of the sequels, because obviously I was positive on 4 and 2's a mixed bag. I mean, I always used to like 2, but when I rewatched it recently for our review, I wasn't as keen. But actually, the stuff at the end of 2 is, I think, really good in the hospital. So I think there's arguments, and you've had moments where it's been, in some of these sequels. I mean, H2O is different, but I guess there's some good horror stuff in H2O. But I think just making your comparison from before, I suppose, in a way, H2O, you just have to accept as a different Halloween movie. It's almost like a new generation's like Halloween, and I think that was largely a pastiche as well. And I thought the pastiche in that was enjoyable mix of things, and I think there's moments where he's going for something a bit more funny, and obviously maybe a pastiche, but there are other moments where he's trying to make it a serious horror movie. So I guess what I'm saying is I knew where I stood with H2O, and I sort of enjoyed it on that level. I enjoyed it as a pastiche, a Halloween pastiche, and it was just a more entertaining Halloween movie, and I sort of understood that. Boone is sort of a little bit off in this, because I think the editing is quite erratic at times, like in that opening scene. I obviously don't find it suspenseful for the most part. Maybe the odd scene I do, or plot moments that can be lost. I think obviously we agree that Zuma's point 2.0 could be lost. I think the stuff with Alison and her friends, apart from the babysitter, I think that stuff could be. I mean, do we really need to have another, Halloween party scene where the boyfriend cheats on someone, turns out to be a douche? Not really.
Not really. It did contain the important plot point, though, of Alison losing her phone, so it got that out of the way, because he takes her phone and throws it in the punch. Yeah. So then we have the whole thing of why can't they reach her later on. I mean, I don't think it was. You could possibly lose it from the film, but I think it also, and I think we do have to keep this in mind. One thing that we actually haven't talked about is that this is the first part of a new trilogy. So some of the stuff that's come up in this movie may be in order to set up stuff for future movies. So if the boyfriend comes back in a future movie, and there is also a deleted scene with him where he's arrested for being drunk, and you actually see that he is actually remorseful. He's looking for Alison, and it adds to his character a little bit more. So right. I think that it was in there to kind of build Alison's world a bit, to show that she's got friends, she's got a boyfriend, maybe her boyfriend isn't the greatest. I do agree that it might be nice to see a decent boyfriend in these films for once. Like, we don't need another douchey boyfriend. But for me, I think that stuff worked because it helped just to build this new world. Because obviously Alison being a new character, we have to build a world around her so that she feels like a real, tangible character. And then we don't know what might be setting up for the future installments. So we maybe have to keep that in mind when we watch this, is that it is going to be the first part of a new trilogy. So it's not 100% supposed to be a standalone film. I think it works as a standalone film, but it will be interesting to see what set up from this film will then cross over into the next film when it comes out.
It might just be this thing where they feel like they have to have a teenage character have a boyfriend, and there has to be some stuff there. And I think that goes back to because of a Halloween. Most of the Halloween movies have had that in some way. So I think that goes back to that. So either make him a bit more likable, or maybe lose him as a character.
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed that he didn't die, I have to admit. I was like, oh, come on, we have a dickhead character and we have no karma. But I'm not sure if he's going to be in the next one. I haven't checked to see if the actor's coming back, but who knows? Maybe we'll get to see him die in the next one. That'll be fun.
Yeah, and I just wish, and again, I guess it's just to set up his death, but I sort of wish the nerdy friend had turned out to be a bit more likable, because, okay, he's got a crush on her, but he could still not be a douche, because at the end of the day, he's maybe got a bit more shot further down the line if he's actually quite nice and doesn't hit on her. And yeah.
No, fair enough.
He got really annoying.
He did, yes. But we got to see him die in a very nice way, so that was at least something. So that's always fun. So I think, we've exhausted. This one's been a full-on one, but I think we've arrived at ratings. I'm going to let you go first because you are obviously going to rate this lower than me, but I am very curious to see where you're going to land. So let's hear your summary.
It has dropped second time around, only a little bit, to be fair. I think the problems just stood out second time around, and even with the positive stuff, I do think there is too much negative for me to go too high, and a lot of the negative is to do with the horror stuff not quite working. So I'm going to go for a solid score, but not a high score, and I'm going to go for a 6.5.
Okay. I was worried you were going to go for like a 4 or a 5, so I was like, okay, okay, we can leave it at that. Okay. Well, I'm obviously going to go higher. This really is my favorite sequel after the original. I can overlook a lot of the flaws because I love this Michael so much. I think this movie really brings him back in a fantastic way, and he is just intimidating to me and awesome. And I actually made a note while I was writing it down. I'm like, I think I'm smiling too much. Do I love Michael Myers too much? I think I need to calm down a little bit here. But he just is such a great villain. So he elevates the film for me. Laurie elevates the film for me. I have a higher opinion of the direction than you do. I actually think that it was not spectacular, but I think it was solid. I think there was some really standout sequences. I really do love the camera work with the long shot. I love the gas station sequence. I love the final showdown between Michael and Laurie and the Strode women taking down Michael. I think that's a fantastic scene. Did you watch to the end of the credits, by the way?
I did this time because when I saw it at the cinema, I left before the end.
Me too.
And I later heard that there was, this post where you don't actually see anything, but you just hear the breathing. So that's a nice that's fair enough.
Yeah. I love this film so much that I would rate it 10 out of 10, except it loses some points for some things. So it's losing a whole point for the Dr. Sartarian storyline because that was just terrible, and it's such a major complaint I have about this film. Like I said, all the other little things I can look over, but not that plot point. And then it loses another half a point for the peanut butter penis line because it's just terrible. So my rating is going to be 8.5 out of 10 because I find this highly enjoyable. I find it entertaining. I find it intense. I love Laurie's characterization. I love Michael for what he has become in this movie, restoring him to his original silent terror. And I just find it a really entertaining film. I really like it. Like when I watch it, I don't find myself getting bored. I don't find myself disengaging. I almost watched it again yesterday. I was almost going to just watch it again for the hell of it. So 8.5 for me.
Overall, I didn't find it that entertaining. I appreciated a lot of what it did. It definitely ends on a high note. But outside of the stuff with Julian and Vicky, probably there wasn't that much that entertained me in the movie. So I've heard extreme reactions to it. And for me, it's more. I remember quite vividly, us leaving the cinema that night, and the guy walking behind us says it was crap, wasn't it? And he's like, and he was being sarcastic. But I said, well, you might as well watch the Rob Zombie one, sort of thing. And to me, that was over the top.
Yeah, that's a little extreme.
Even if I conceded it was bad, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
But I think obviously there are extreme opinions like that. I think there's people who find it mediocre, but there you have it. So I'm more in the middle. I think it's a solid sequel. I suppose I shouldn't give away my favourite sequel because we are going to do a ranking video. Probably people who have been watching along can figure it out, but that is something we're going to do later in the month. We will do a ranking video, which will be on Rachel's channel. So that'll be fun, and she's going to edit it all together and add some clips alongside. So we'll just reiterate our thoughts on the franchise. And we will, rank them in order of how we feel. Obviously, including the new movie, Halloween Kills, which is coming out next week. So there you have it. So we're up to date. Halloween Kills is out next Friday. So we're going to both check it out, obviously, and we'll be ready for the review next week. So next week, you can expect our thoughts on Halloween Kills with both ends, because obviously Rachel goes in with a lot of expectations, and I'm excited anyway because I think obviously it's a new Halloween movie, so I'm always excited, and I think there's possibilities with the movies. Obviously, I'm probably not going in as high as Rachel because I do have more issues with this one, but I think I'm still excited. It'll be interesting to see what they do with it. So,
yes.
Yeah, more Halloween to come before the end of the month. Let us know your thoughts on this Halloween, the first David Gordon Green Halloween, in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Share us out on social media. You can also check out Rachel's channel, Rachel McDonald, if you just type that into YouTube. I'll put the link in the description as always, and we'll be back soon with more Halloween reviews and more horror in general. Thanks guys, and see you later.
Mom! Help us! I can't do it! I'm sorry, I can't do it! Gotcha. Happy Halloween, Michael.